All right, so this topic is a bit different from things we usually tackle. We're oftentimes talking about crypto and all kinds of things, but today we're going to talk about shamanism. And I actually want to lump in what I would call the creative act. And I think that every culture, every human culture has some aspect of this. And this has been very traditional in tribal societies, Buddhism. We've got this happening in Native American. We have these types of things happening in just about every culture that has existed on the human planet. And I believe in the Western world as well. And so I think that this is a great topic of conversation. And I know that all three of us have some connections with things that happen in the world of this. So, Lucas, let's talk about shamanism and the creative act.
As we start this conversation, one thing that I think broadly when we talk about shamanism, and the creative, as you were opening it up, I thought there's also this increased awareness, talk about aliens, talk about UAPs, and sometimes I like to think that our minds are not in control, that we are not in control of our destiny, and that we are tools that receive consciousness. And consciousness is this is not my idea by any means, by the way, but consciousness is something that exists. And when I think of shamanism or creative acts, both, I think that as a way in which we're giving up this notion that we are in control, and it's an attempt to access a broader a broader uh, a, a broader experience of what consciousness is. So um, we can get into all aspects of it. You have Rusty. You also, just before we get to diving into deeply into it, when we talk about shamanism, Rusty, what comes to your mind?
Well, a lot comes to my mind. It's a topic that I'm very interested in when it comes to just the larger way of history that has had it on multiple cultures across the world. One of the things that I do in my spare time is I help to be the secretary of an ESP church. And some of the ideas and thoughts that we go into with the beliefs of the church kind of goes along with the shamanism, with the Druids, with a lot of their ancient history of what they do. And one of the things that really intrigues me about it is when you talk about shamanism, you're really talking about ancient history. I mean, that's one of the things that really just intrigues me is when you think about the very ancient histories, the very first beginnings of what people believed. They thought about shamanism, and shamanism was a way to in touch themselves with the gods. And I really think that no matter where you are in the world, it kind of blends into your beliefs, into your culture. You have the shamans, you have the druids, you have the monks, you have just I mean, even Nostradamus would go into kind of a haze of effects added induced to him just so he could kind of predict what he was seeing in his different visions.
I think the thing that comes to most people's mind when they think about something like this is they think about taking drugs. They think about psychedelics or like going out into the world and taking ayahuasca or peyote or something like that. But the first thing that comes to my mind is the mind state that is required, and this is where its tie into the modern world is seen and felt. I think I hear people talking about flow state and stuff like this and being in the creative mind state. Or if you hear creative people talk, they'll talk about the muse. And so the mind state that's required, yes, you can get to it from ingestion of these substances or whatever, but a lot of cultures get into the mind state through a different means: meditation, drumming, or bell ringing. Like the types of ways that you can arrive at the mind state where you're in flow, you're bringing something back from that other land. You get there through a variety of different means. And even today's modern science and neuroscience is starting to really tap into this. It's starting to find its way into what traditional cultures have experienced through drumming, through meditative acts, or whatever. And so this idea of shamanism, or this going into a different place and bringing something back, whether it be a creative work or it being the traditional mechanism of the medicine man going into the different place and bringing back knowledge for the tribe. It's you go to this other place and then you come back with something that's very, very interesting. And I think we should talk a little bit about creatives who've tapped into this in our modern society. So at some point, I'd love to start pointing out some people that I would lump into the category of the modern day shaman.
Before we go there, Dustin came on yesterday and he talked about bell ringing, and he talked about a new way, a new society, things that we are changing as we come to, in some words, a crisis point of the way that we have aligned ourselves politically for so many years. I think you are both onto something, and I also want to throw into that mix, not just drumming and bell ringing, drugs, religious chanting, prayers, but also type 2 funds, pilgrimages, long walks, immersing oneself in wilderness and in nature. And I think those are things that we have seen. When I was younger, they were a little more fringe. People did it. Maybe it was more easily accessible in a world less populated too, but it was still outside the. It was still, people didn't align their lives around it. But I think we're going to see more people who are looking for these experiences. So I want to talk about long walks in a bit, but before then, tell me, when you think of shamans, of modern shamans today, who comes to your mind?
I mean, the first person that would come to my mind would be Rick Rubin, which I think some people would maybe laugh at, but I mean, this guy to me, I had a chance to get exposed to a book that he wrote, which is The Creative Act, and it might as well just be a treatise on modern day shamanism, because when he's talking about like what he's got in this book, and here it is right here, The Creative Act. Um, I'd say the first third of the book is just him talking about getting into that flow state, different cultures that experience that same type of thing. And this isn't just me like plugging this book, but rather that's why I'm saying this is I think that there are a ton of people who are tapping into this in our modern culture, and they're starting to find back ways to what these more traditional cultures have done for a long period of time. And anybody that has gone through a creative process or has found themselves in that flow state, I think is experiencing the same thing. So Rick Rubin for sure is one. I would.
Yeah, I busted out. I was glad I was on mute because I busted out laughing the moment you said Rick Rubin. And Rusty said Nostradamus earlier, and I was like, that's our musical Nostradamus is Rick Rubin. I also know that Rick Rubin is one hirsute as all get out. Look, see, they have the same beard. Nostradamus had access to more wax, but I know that Rick Rubin also loves to go barefoot, and I think part of that immersing of oneself in nature is also, tactile, like touching things, being in contact, not being afraid of dirt, as seeing yourself as one with the world. And I know Rick Rubin is an I think that people, I don't know if he wears shoes whenever he goes into recording studios or or out in public, but I know that he people who go to his home and the studio that he has at his house.
I'm gonna throw David Lynch in there too. Unfortunately, he passed away recently, yesterday, I think. But I would lump him in there with the modern day shamans. He definitely is one of the most creative people that's ever lived. He went into the flow state. He brought back just tremendously creative ideas and things, and expressed it in his art and filmmaking. This guy, I would put it in the same group.
I was thinking about David Lynch, and yes, sad to hear of his passing yesterday. And but did David Lynch have any road movies? Can you call Dune a road movie? You know, the, it was because in some ways when I think about shamanism, and I was thinking about directors and different types of art that we have. To me, like the road movie is the film's take on that pilgrimage, uh, on people letting the world affect them, and that is that we see that so often in film, the road movie, the Thelma and Louise, we're out of control, the world happens to us. But did David Lynch have a road movie that I'm not aware of?
I think maybe if there was one, it's probably Lost Highway.
I never saw Lost Highway, but I also think maybe I need to think about Dude as a road movie. Um, but that's aside the point. I don't want to go off on tangents of film. We can go there forever. But what is and now we're there.
Well, I mean, we don't need to spend too much time on it just because we mentioned it. I try to always throw things on the screen, but yeah. Anyway, so the modern shamans, I think all these three would fit in with that, and it's this idea that you go into some type of meditative trance, you're bringing something back, and I think that this to me is the essence of what the shamans of the tribe were doing. Because if you think about somebody that's getting high or just like sitting in some trance state, like how does that help the tribe? Like you've got a bunch of people that are working diligently every day to help survive out in the wilderness, hunting, gathering, making things, tanning hides, whatever, and you've got this one guy that's just kind of off there just tripping balls. Like what does that help the tribe? Why would they suffer such a person? Well, because they bring something back, and this is, they're bringing back knowledge or ideas that then somebody tries. And if you think about something even in the modern world, like I would say a modern idea of physics, like think about what happened with quantum theory. That's not something that you come up with from deriving first principles. Like you have to go into a way out there mind state to even think of how that could describe what you're seeing and the effects that you're seeing in the world. So I think that some of our scientists have tapped into this in a particular way, and it's what they bring back to humanity or bring back to the tribe. That's the reason why the tribe would suffer such a thing, because otherwise it's a drain on resources, and it's somebody who's ostensibly not tanning hides or doing anything that's to the help of the physical body, but it is contributing to the the mental state of the tribe, to the overall state of society, and it's fulfilling a very important role, and it's one that I don't think AI is going to do. So if I think about our modern world and like what AI is potentially going to be doing for humanity, I don't think it's ever going to be doing this. The creative leap, that quantum jump that happens in human consciousness, that I think if that gets replicated inside of AI, that will be a very interesting day for humanity. But I don't see that on the horizon.
Funny that you bring up AI. I agree with you, but I think that if there is some sort of tension as to, who's fighting over control of what goes on in the decisions that are made by AI or by a machine, then you can have this tension of creation of unexpected results. And going back to drug use in the modern world today, drug use is our relationship with plants and substances of the world, and human consciousness and human experience is ancient. But something that I see in the world, what I think a lot about in our narratives of drug use, and the political the political response usually to suppress it, throw drug users in jail, or um, I don't know. Like one, I look at Los Angeles with the fires there. When those first happened, I said, one, there's a lot of homeless people who want to stay warm. Two, there's a lot of homeless people who are on drugs and they are fascinated with fire. And it's we need to come we need to remember ancient interpretations of drug use and remember the ritual that goes with them. And suppressing them, I don't think has worked very well with us. But Rusty, you brought up earlier that you're part of a church. And I think that speaks to oh, you also said that there's an aspect of shamanism to your church. And I know that that your church has creative ideas about that. When do you think or I should say, does your church have like ritual practices around drug use or shamanism or psychedelics, or does it address those at all?
I wouldn't say that there's necessarily like any practices that the church does as a like a whole or as a major group, but one of the main things that the church that I'm a part of does is it has no dogma. That's its dogma, is that it has no dogma, and so that it really just allows you to believe whatever you want to believe, and allows you to take comfort in whatever allows you to reach that extra level of consciousness or understanding about yourself. And so when it goes into these practices of shamanism or druids or different things like that, we really embrace those as a way to enrich yourself and as a way that really works and has proven history. And one of the main things that the church that I was a part of was created by was a guy named Al Manning. And Al Manning was a really smart person. He wrote a lot of books, and about 20 different books he wrote. And some of the books, come and go into some of these kind of ideas. They go into the thoughts of, the different mindsets of what happens in shamanism, or what can be with leprechauns, or what can be with fairies, or it can be some of these thoughts that a lot of people, they just forget about it. They just consider it make believe stories of the past. But, to me, there was never really a make-believe story of the past. When you think about things like witches and Wiccans and the occult, all those stories came from something. All those stories came from somebody, and they had an origin. And I really believe that there is strength when it comes into reading the right words and saying the right things and the right, kind of chants, and tapping into that kind of ancient language that we forgot about. And I do believe that, as Grant was saying, that this is something that the AI is not really going to be able to take a part of, because, AI is a learned technology, and there's not really a way to learn this mindset or learn these ideas without experiencing them.
That
Rusty,
I love what you just said, because so much of this is experiential. It has nothing to do with learning, right? Like a lot of what we do is book learning, the application of logic. You learn a little bit, and then you apply it. You learn how from somebody telling you how to hammer a nail in, then you hammer a nail in. But this is the experiential quantum leap, and ritual, I think, is an important aspect of getting to that point. And even certain sects of Christianity, I think, had these types of aspect to them, where you have this chanting, you have this kind of repeated monotonistic thing that's happening and getting you into a specific state, and prayer and all of this kind of stuff that happens is an experiential precursor. And then all of a sudden there's this quantum leap that happens where you go someplace else. And almost, I think, when people are having the experiences through psychedelics or whatever, they are borrowing into the future when they do this. And there are people who have written about this, who write about this specifically, that says that's like a crutch. But like once you have experienced it enough times, you almost eschew it, you almost shun it, because you say, I don't need that crutch anymore. I know how to get me to that place experientially. And for people who go through this in the modern world, who get into flow state, I think programmers oftentimes will experience this, where you're really getting into coding, and you're getting into a specific state where it's almost like you're summoning the code from somewhere else. And then when you lay it down and you look back, you're like, I don't even know how I wrote that. I don't know how that happened. And there are certain authors who have expressed the same kind of a thing. Stephen King said he got so high at some points he doesn't even remember writing the books that he wrote. They just sort of manifested onto the page, and he would look back and be like, I don't remember writing any of that. So these things do happen, and they are happening, and they're happening in our modern world. And people that are tapping into this oftentimes are tapping into it in a creative way. And so that idea that you're going outside, you're bringing something back, this is the repeated, I think, theme throughout all of this, and it does involve this ritualistic precursor, and then the quantum leap, and then somehow you're in that other place. And whatever is happening with UAPs right now, it's starting to see that modern science and even the government is coming around to that there's some sort of a dimensional barrier that seems to be broken in our modern world, and that we've got people that are testifying in front of Congress of these phenomenon that are happening.
You bring up chanting. I think about chanting a lot. When I go to church, we have hymns. I go to a Lutheran church, and there are hymns. But most or all Christian churches used to chant. We all know these Gregorian chants, and I find them mesmerizing. But this notion of hymns came from John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist Church, and he said that we should be joyful when we come together to talk about God. I don't know if he's necessarily right. I think about the mask of joy that I see on Instagram and social media. But also, as we talk about religions and music and also nature, I think of Heaven's Gate. I'm obsessed with Heaven's Gate, or was once in my life. Heaven's Gate was the group of people who took Kool-Aid in a mansion in San Diego. In the wake of the dot-com bubble, whenever Halley's Comet came to the United States, maybe in 1997, maybe it was a little later than that, maybe 99, but somewhere around there. Or not Halley's Comet, Hale-Bopp.
No, you got it right. 97. That was it.
Was it 97? Yep. Well,
there it is on the screen. There we go.
There we go.
They got kind of a wild little graphic there. Look at that.
They were very interesting, an interesting group of people, and for many years, I mean, many of the group of Hale-Bopp had been together, I believe, since the 60s or the early 70s, and they, the leaders of the group were Do and Re, as in do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And they practiced a lot of singing. They had a lot of beliefs about UFOs, but not only that, but they lived in many campgrounds in northwestern New Mexico, so in the Farmington area. And I thought it was interesting to dig into them and to think about, again, a time in the world. We talk. We live in a time where we have a lot of options today, especially like post-COVID, when everybody jumped into a van and traveled to the West and explored the national parks, etc. But in post-50s, in the 60s and 70s, people didn't have that much. It wasn't as acceptable to live alternative lifestyles, and I think of them in some ways as blazing a trail in that regard.
Well, and I know that we've had this conversation quite a bit, but like, when our modern America, it has so much of the roots of native peoples, like, because when we started to have the European settlers that were coming here, they found the lifestyle of the Native Americans so compelling that it was hard to keep them away from it. I know you have a lot of experience with that, Lucas. Could you say a little bit about how that intersects with our conversation?
Well, I said earlier, pilgrimages and long journeys, and when Columbus, not Columbus, Cabeza de Vaca. Cabeza de Vaca was an early explorer. He was shipwrecked. Blah blah blah. He was shipwrecked in Florida, and I say shipwrecked. He and a group of other Spanish explorers, and the explorers are different than the conquistadors. They came first. The explorers came first. But Cabeza de Vaca was one of the Spanish explorers, and they came from Cuba to Florida. And they walked around all the way up into maybe South Carolina, but through Georgia. And they made many comments, fascinating stories from this group. And I think this was a group of 300 or 400 Spanish explorers. They got back to the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America, and and a hurricane had destroyed all their ships. So they built massive rafts, and about 100 men got on each of these rafts. Think of huge trees laid over on the edge of the bay and drug out into the water, lashed together with vines. And then they floated down to Galveston. And below Galveston, I think at Matagorda Bay, they washed ashore. When they washed ashore, all but 4 of them were killed by the Karankawa. The 4 that lived were enslaved. Fascinating story. They were enslaved for 4 years, and they would meet up. They were separated into different tribes. They would meet up. The 4th year, when they met up to celebrate the cactus, the prickly pear cactus, and they comment, by the way, that the prickly pear cactus were cultivated into massive ancient prickly pear. And they would gather together and harvest the buds off the prickly pear cactus, and the slave's job was to stoke the fires, and the fires created smoke, and the smoke kept the mosquitoes away. So the slaves also, because they were of the lowest social class, had to stand far away from the fires because they were subjected to more mosquito bites, and it was
I can think of no more horrible torture than having to stand at the edge of the fire that would keep you from getting bit by mosquitoes and then just getting bit by mosquitoes. That sounds like the ultimate type of torture.
I know. Well, when the explorers were walking around Florida or the Southeast, that they asked constantly, like, why are all the houses up on mounds? And the people said, to get us out of the mosquitoes. It's so funny that there's a lot of fascination with pyramids and the mounds in America, but whenever these early Europeans came over, the reasoning was, well, it gets us away from the mosquitoes. Why do you smoke tobacco? Well, tobacco makes your blood less appetizing to mosquitoes. So we do have an ancient association and with mosquitoes. God bless you. Live in the land of massive mosquitoes too. But
it is. There are places where I live that if you happen to fall down on the trail, that you wouldn't be able to get back up because you bit by mosquitoes so much and you have so much blood loss that you just die of lack of blood. And I've actually had times where I've had to run because there was just a cloud of mosquitoes behind me, and if you didn't keep running, you couldn't stay away from them. It's bad, man. Some places on the planet are so bad that you almost can't be outside because of the mosquitoes.
Well, the Cabeza de Vaca and Esteban and the other 2 Europeans agreed. And the 4th year at the Festival of the Cactus, when all the people came together and also consumed, hallucinogenics, they got together and they fled. And they went west. They went to the desert to get out of the humidity and to get away from the mosquitoes. But long story, going back to native concepts, we're often amazed, or people express amazement at the distribution of artifacts, feathers from Central America, and rocks from South America, and shells from the California coast, and these things that were distributed far and wide. But many of the native peoples talked about journeying all their life and going on spirit journeys, going on quests, and that's what they spent a lot of time doing. And when I think that we live in this Protestant and in a social order here in North America, in South America, that is trying to, or often is trying, and our progress like goes back to these pre-Columbian concepts. I think that we enjoy road trips. We enjoy wandering around.
It's that modern day retreat into the wilderness, the camping trip, whatever. That that desire is this manifest, I think. So, whenever you take that camping trip with your buddies, if it isn't just, tubing down the river and just getting wasted drinking alcohol, that hiking into the mountains and getting away from modern society and being in nature, that I think is tapping into this same sort of vein, this same sort of thought process.
And it's not just getting into nature, because it's one thing to, drive to a lake and camp somewhere, but it's another thing to actually be moving through nature, and to where you don't have a set camp. And I think this is a very, in some ways, people who are new to camping or to hunting, or to taking these pilgrimages or spirit journeys, they don't that doesn't necessarily occur to them or appear what's going on from the outside. So they think, I mean, think think of the 1940s comic strips where it's like, drag a camper out to Yellowstone and set it up, and that's the dream. That's not the dream. The dream is to be constantly moving. And Cabeza de Vaca, he walked all the way to Baja California over several years. And on that journey, by the time he got to Baja California, he had a retinue, an entourage of hundreds and hundreds of people who, a couple of guys showed up in a village in on the Pecos River, and they'd pick up 50 people and who followed him. And he said, "Where's the corn from?" And the people said, "Oh, it comes from, the Rio Grande. It comes from the Pueblo people at the Rio Grande." So they turned and went to the Rio Grande. Anyway, they walked everywhere, and they were joined by many, many people. And I think it's a powerful thing to one to walk across nature, but two, just to be moving through nature is an amazing experience.
Another, just in our tour of things that I think about when I think about shamanism and this idea of getting into flow state, is the whirling dervishes, the Sufis. So this is where you get into this type of state just by spinning in a circle really fast, like for an extended period of time, and then you end up in this same kind of a flow state. So movement, drumming, sound, all of these experiential things lead to the same kind of place.
Yeah, I've spun around. I had a bad experience on a squirrel cage at a carnival once, so I'm reticent to spin about now.
I wonder
Um,
if some amount of roller coaster gets you slightly to this as well. That you maybe touch the edge of this, and that's why roller coasters can be somewhat interesting in the same sense of you're experiencing a high amount of G-force, whatever, and that starts to push on your physiology in a certain way.
I think so. I had a friend who was in game development. I don't know what you call them. Gaming, like computer games. And he very much looked at games as what was going on in the peripheral of of the background of the game. And he paid a lot of attention to that, and sort of had a classification of the progression of computer games with what that peripheral experience was, because to him it seemed that was part of the allure of games, was to give people this motion of movement, or this um, a perception of movement in things like spinning around. I mean, there's a lot of focus on, first person shooter games as the action is shooting. Oh, how violent! But in a lot of, what's going on there too is you're giving a character something to do as they move around, and also a reason to be agile and to be able to move their spaceship through this foreign world, um, with a lot of grace.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating subject. It's a fascinating experiential thing. Maybe the last thing that we have a few minutes to talk about is the modern desire for the spiritual journey, and I think this has started to happen with the ritualistic taking of ayahuasca.
I mean, yes, also tobacco, cannabis. I mean, I think people are becoming more open to these ideas of opening their mind, their psyche up to what plants can show them. So, but I think a lot of this too goes back to work, um, having a social value, a social credit, or a society that gives you a break, so that people can um, that they can leave their jobs for a couple of weeks and go on some of these other experiences, and not be fired because there's some because they're a bad person because they did ayahuasca in Brazil. Um,
Well, the reason I'm bringing it up is because this is a part of our modern culture. I mean, you start to hear, the tech bros in Silicon Valley are they'll make no bones about the fact that they went and had an ayahuasca experience somewhere, and that they came back and they felt like they were more energized, more creative, whatever. It's this tapping into this, spiritual aspect, which almost seems devoid in our life as people have drifted away from traditional churches that may have given them some amount of connection with this part of who we are as humans. There's a strive, there's a desire to try to connect with that in some fashion, and so this is becoming normalized in some sense, and now even with marijuana being legalized in a lot of places, now we're seeing that some of these traditional psychoactive substances are being used to treat some of the dysfunctions that we're seeing in our modern society, and to whatever extent that those dysfunctions are happening because we're disconnected from any kind of a ritual connection to these types of things. um, we're starting to see that modern medicine is turning towards this and saying, well, maybe there's something here, maybe this is a part of who we are as human beings.
I think there's a lot of it has to do also with comfort and happiness and pleasure. Some of these notions that these are what we're seeking in our experience in the world are questioned through ritual. And I think about coffee for one. I mean, I posted earlier about enjoying a little bit of ice cream in my coffee, but to me, the purest of coffee drinkers and tea drinkers embrace the bitterness. And it might be about the caffeine, but I think a lot of it is about starting your day with something that's bitter, and appreciating that. I think the same goes for cocoa, and we see we see this hipster resurgence in drinking cocoa without sugar and without milk, and with a dash of cornmeal, like the Aztec American people did in their rituals.
Well,
And
chocolate is definitely a psychoactive substance. I don't think a lot of people have actually experienced that. You have to experience cocoa in its purest form, and just like grabbing a teaspoon of cocoa powder is not going to do it. Like you almost have to get the raw fermented bean, not raw, but like the fermented bean in its pure form. And if you just chew on that, it is one of the most bitter things that you can experience, and it definitely will provoke a reaction within you that is unexpected if you're not used to it, because Hershey's chocolate bar and the fermented cocoa bean are very, very different things. They are as night and day as Disney is to the stories that Disney changed and modified. In those stories in their purest form were very dark and had crazy aspects to them, and Disney sort of changed it and made it safe. That's exactly what's happened to modern chocolate. So I think cocoa is another good example of something that is a very traditional food, was consumed for a very different reason.
not just Disney, but also the sugar lobby. Um, you know, sh- uh, we talked today about pharmaceutical and agricultural corporations, but they go in large part back to back to the sugar lobby. And it's interesting to look in American history and American politics and see the result of our political organization, of the sugar plantations in Hawaii and everything that happened there, and the amount of control that they had in inserting themselves into all sorts of different foods that we had eaten for a long time. So anyway, I'd say to sum it up for me today, when I think about shamanism, I say embrace bitter things. Look to a longer window of appreciation, whether that be long walks or bitter foods and bitter drinks in the morning. They can teach you something about yourself.
All right. Love this topic. Really glad that we were able to finally get to it. And we'll see you next time on FOMO.